Running the Boston Marathon this year was an incredible experience. It was unlike any other race that I've ever run. I loved every second of it. And I did my best to soak in every moment. I was giving high fives to spectators along the way, and I even ended up running my second fastest time in the marathon ever. But there was this moment. It was around mile 16, and I leaned over to give some kids high fives along the route, and as I leaned over, apparently I cut off another runner. And I immediately started to apologize, but he either didn't hear or didn't care. And he yelled at me and pushed me and told me to pay attention, and then said a few other choice words and then ran off. And that interaction immediately pulled me from my flow into a state of confusion and a little bit of embarrassment. Here I was running with tens of thousands of other runners, and I had mistakenly thought that we were all running together, that we were all on this same pilgrimage that I was on, running towards the mecca of running, which is the Boston Marathon finish line. It was in that split second that I was snapped back to reality, or at least to his reality. It was in that moment that I realized that none of us were running the same race. You see, that experience, that confrontation there, was an experience that all of us have had, and that is the moment that we wake up to the reality of someone else. If you've heard me talk about the Boston Marathon this year, you know that I was attempting to channel the Taoist concept of Wu Wei, which is a state of effortless action. And so I was in this blissed out flow state at this point. I hadn't hit the wall yet. And I assumed that everyone else was in the same state, in that same place. But this runner wasn't. He was somewhere else entirely. It isn't uncommon for us to get lost in our own train of thought or in our own way of thinking. We each live deeply entrenched in our own story that we tell ourselves, with the unconscious assumption that everyone around us is experiencing the same reality that we're experiencing. Some of us go to church assuming that everyone around us has the same political beliefs as us, or we assume that the people that align with us politically also have the same morals as us, or the partner that we're raising kids together with has the same idea of what it takes to be a good parent. But that's just not always the case, and all it takes is one interaction for us to wake up to that fact. Okay, so now let's bring in some philosophy. And this is going to be quite the detour, but I think it's worth it, and I promise I'll bring it back into running, so stick around. So there was the philosopher Socrates, who was famously put to death for corrupting the youth and refusing to worship the correct gods. Well, one of his students was Plato, and when Plato saw the masses executing his mentor, someone that he looked up to deeply, he kind of lost faith in the public, in society. And I think his allegory of the cave illustrates this perfectly. In the allegory of the cave, everyone is chained up inside a cave and they're unable to leave, and the reality that they experience is just the shadows on a wall from a flame inside the cave. And in this allegory, Plato kind of sees himself as someone that's able to unchain himself and leave the cave. And when he leaves the cave, he sees the sun, which is the symbolic for the truth, the true source of reality. And the public, on the other hand, remains chained up, ignorant, and unwilling to believe the philosopher who has seen the sun. In my opinion, this allegory illustrates the turn away from public dialogue towards contemplation, towards the idea that if you're going to think deeply and truthfully and profoundly, you must do it in isolation, away from the public dialogue, because the public opinion is either useless or potentially corrupting to your train of thought. Now, according to Hannah Arendt, this philosophical movement inwards was a fatal mistake. Hannah Arendt was a philosopher and a political theorist who believed that when you remove political engagement or public dialogue, you end up dehumanizing everyone else, because dialogue is the one tool that we have that leads to understanding. Without this understanding, people are reduced from humans to objects whose sole identity is what they do for work. According to Arendt, we have created a public economy instead of a public society. When our identity is reduced to what we contribute economically, we struggle to find meaning in life. And when that happens at a societal scale, that craving for meaning and identity leaves us vulnerable to totalitarian regimes. Arendt was also actually a German Jew who narrowly escaped the Nazi invasion, and she believes that this is what led the German people to be susceptible to the Nazi Party ideals. Where this gets interesting is during the trial of Adolf Eichmann. Eichmann was a high-ranking Nazi Party leader who was responsible for the deportation of millions of Jews to extermination camps. But this is where Arendt walked the walk instead of just philosophizing. Arendt refused to paint him as a monster the way the rest of the world wanted to. She saw him as just a man taking orders who failed to think critically about what he was doing. This was extremely controversial back then because many of the people just wanted Eichmann to represent absolute evil. But Arendt insisted on describing what she actually observed, holding true to her philosophy that she prioritized reality as she saw it over the comforting story society wanted to tell about it. She saw this Nazi officer as a victim of a societal level meaning crisis brought on by people operating in isolation. And so, as far as I understand it, Arendt is making the case that the Holocaust and everything leading up to it was a failure of both the deep thinkers to engage in public dialogue, but also a failure of the public to philosophize. Okay, so now let's bring it back to my running experience. I'm not comparing myself or the runner I cut off to a Nazi Party leader by any means. The point I'm trying to make is that we often assume that our reality is the collective reality, and that whatever we are going through is the most important. And I think that's what that other runner and I were doing when we were running the marathon. I had forgotten that there were likely other runners that were going for a PR that day because I was so wrapped up in my transcendent experience. I think we often get tunnel vision and get stuck in our own story and forget the fact that we are next to people who have their own unique experiences that shape the way that they are experiencing reality. And that is as true for the runner next to you as it is for the runner on the other side of the world. Arendt's philosophy doesn't just describe what happened in World War II. It describes a failure mode that lives in all of us, and we can see it happening around us today. The collapse of genuine encounters with other people being replaced by echo chambers populated entirely by essentially other versions of ourselves. By Arendt's logic, this collapse is the precondition for a kind of moral blindness that is so complete that ordinary people can participate in extraordinary evil without ever even feeling like they're doing anything wrong. And that's not a story about evil human monsters. It's merely what happens when we stop actually talking with each other. Arendt wasn't the only philosopher that was worried about our inability to see other people clearly. Iris Murdoch arrived at a remarkably similar conclusion from a completely different direction. Murdoch thought that the default state of human consciousness was fantasy. We move through the world wrapped in a continuous, self-serving inner monologue, narrating reality in a way that keeps us at the center of it. According to Murdoch, the angry runner and I were doing what most people do most of the time. We were experiencing a world that is mostly a projection of our own stories. For me, I was projecting a pilgrimage, and I'm not sure what the other runner was experiencing, but it was probably much more of a race than it was a pilgrimage. I think the similarities between Murdoch and Arendt are remarkable in the sense that they both point us towards an awareness of the existence of other people's realities. For Arendt, wisdom comes from recognizing that the world appears differently to different people, and that reality emerges through this plurality of perspectives. And for Murdoch, that's where morality begins and where love grows, when we stop hallucinating a self-centered world and attend to what is actually there. We're participating in the true, the good, and the beautiful. I think both of these women are pointing us towards something incredibly profound and useful, and that would be that as we run through life, we are inevitably going to bump into each other, and that's not a failure. That's the point. That's part of human experience. But whatever this interaction looks like, when we do bump into each other, when we disagree, it can serve as a reminder that even though we all have race bibs on, even though we're all running in the same direction, not one of us is running the same race as another. And I think recognizing that is an act of love. But I'm not an expert in any of this. This is just something that I found interesting and thought-provoking. And I hope it was interesting or thought-provoking for you. And if it was, I hope you'll stick around, and I'll catch you in the next video.